Hello everyone. Once again, thanks everybody for joining us, and welcome to this webinar looking at a new product that Petrosys have developed, which aims to connect the G&G subsurface data with ArcGIS Pro. I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name's Kevin Ward, for those of you that haven't met me before. My background's in geology and petroleum geoscience. I've been with Petrosys for about 10 years now, mainly working in client-facing support, training, sort of professional services sort of roles, and more recently moved into the VP role for Petrosys throughout Europe, Russia, and Africa. And we're very honoured today to have one of our long-term users, Catherine Hawley, who's a senior geoscientist at CGG, joining us so that she's actually showing us a real workflow rather than me just showing some demo data. Kat, do you want to say a quick hi?
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to work for CGG for a bit over 10 years and working on a range of things from a global scale down to kind of field scale, so all over the world. So, but yeah, I've been a Petrosys user for about 10 years, so know a little bit about it, and an Arc Pro user for about a year, so relatively new on the Arc Pro side.
Right, that sounds familiar. I think everybody's getting going with ArcGIS Pro now, which has been great to see. So the agenda then for the next half hour or so is to start with an introduction of Petrosys as a company for those of you that don't know much about us. We'll then go into what we've kind of identified working with clients over the last few years as being the kind of current problem in the industry, which is the disconnect between the G&G subsurface data and the GIS data world. And then we'll introduce what we hope you'll agree is a solution. It's the first release of this solution, so there's a whole amount more that we can do and we will do with this module based on your feedback both today and from users. But hopefully we can present a solution that we focused on the key things that integrate the G&G world and the GIS world. And then we'll go into the live demo that Kat will run us through. Using her real-world data, and then we'll come back for a couple of slides just to summarise what we've talked about, and then go into that question and answer session. So let me start with an introduction to Petrosys then. We are a provider of geotechnical and data management software solutions to the oil and gas industry, and we've been going for over 30 years now. So we're a recognised leader in the provision of mapping, surface modelling, seismic processing, data management, and portfolio analysis and portfolio management software solutions. We are part of a much larger organisation called Constellation Software. They have very sort of high-end technical software companies throughout various different vertical markets, and so we're lucky enough to be partnered with some sister companies that are also within that organisation. Companies like Globe Claritas Seismic Processing, Interica Data Management, and GP Info Exploration Information Software. And we have a long-term client base, including international major organisations, and we're also an Esri Silver partner. So we've been an Esri Bronze partner for a number of years, but during the launch of the module that we'll talk about today, we have become an Esri Silver partner, which I think just reiterates that commitment we have to the Esri user community. We have frontline offices throughout the world, so Houston, Calgary. I'm based in Glasgow just now, KL, Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, and Wellington, so a good global coverage there. Okay, so let's move on then to talk about the things we're going to talk about today. We'll start with what we've identified as being the current problem, the disconnect between the G&G subsurface world and GIS data. So what this schematic is trying to show is that the G&G environment, the sort of things that people want to create maps of or create models using are things like well data, seismic navigation and interpretation, structure grids, so depth and time structure grids, attribute grids, as well as contours and fault polygons. And within these, there's various things that people want to create models using, things like well top information. There's various things that people want to display as well, so well paths, measure depth versus true vertical depth, contours with contour labels, grids that have fault polygons embedded within them so that the contours are snapping nicely against the edge of those fault polygons in a geologically realistic way. So there's lots of things that people want to create maps and models of. And within the G&G environment, there are tools that do this. You can display this sort of data within Petros, for example, or you can display seismic within Decision Space, and there's various other tools, obviously, on the market. Where the problem comes in is that ArcGIS Pro and Esri's products in general are really are a global sort of standard for sort of high quality mapping. So I think most companies are familiar with using ArcGIS Pro, and the problem that we have is that there's a disconnect between the companies that want to create maps and present models in ArcGIS Pro from the G&G data themselves. And so what we often see people doing is using exchange routines to convert data from the G&G environment and be able to create maps within ArcGIS Pro. And we have tools to do this sort of conversion already. So we can convert grids into an Esri build file and display them in ArcGIS Pro. We can convert contours into shape files. So we have technology to do that. But the problem with that is it's a bit of a laborious task having to convert the data and then get them into the GIS world. And the question you may ask yourself is, well, how do I deal with new data or new interpretation? Because yes, I may have a solution to get contours into ArcGIS Pro, but what happens if my interpretation changes? First of all, I have to go back to the package, it may be Petrel or Decision Space, and I have to regenerate surfaces and regenerate fault polygons, and then I have to convert the data again and get it into ArcGIS Pro, where I can make those corporate level maps that my company require. So this is where the solution comes in. This is where the Petrosys add-in for ArcGIS Pro comes in. One of the main aims of the tool is to be able to display technical subsurface data from your chosen E&P software live into ArcGIS Pro. If I can show that schematically, what the module allows you to do is to choose from a range of common E&P software, file formats, databases, even data platforms like OSDU, for example, connect to the data wherever it may sit and display it or create models of it to display live inside ArcGIS Pro. And then if the data changes, you just simply click the refresh button and that updates in your ArcGIS Pro map. So we can display and synchronize, as I mentioned, wells, well paths, seismic navigation, grids, contours, and fault polygons, so all of the things you need in the subsurface world. We can also run advanced surface and fault generation, manipulation, volumetric workflows. So there's a geoscience toolkit, essentially, that's available now within ArcGIS Pro. And you can see this example here, and apologies if it's a little bit small, but you can see this uses creating a porosity and a permeability grid using a shapefile. They're then creating a porosity and permeability grid using an ArcGIS web service, and they're then creating a porosity and a permeability grid using a direct connection to Petrel. And you can create all of these sort of grids in this workflow and then display the results, as I said, live within ArcGIS Pro. So you've got that fault generation, manipulation, volumetrics workflow toolbox as well. And finally, once you've actually used the tool to get the data displayed live inside of ArcGIS Pro, you can then control the display style and publish to the ArcGIS portal or wherever it may be as part of a normal workflow. So once we've actually, what Petrosys are doing is facilitating that connection between your G&G data and the ArcGIS Pro world. Once you've got the data in ArcGIS Pro, you can use all of the high-end advanced technical capabilities of ArcGIS Pro to finalise your maps. And so that then takes me on to the live demonstration. So hopefully that's a good overview of what the aim is of this module, and then Kat can hopefully show you how she's been able to use it in a real world setting so far. So Kat, can I hand over to you then?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm just going to show you one example workflow, and clearly there's a whole bunch of different ways that you could use this tool and a whole wealth of different things that it's going to be useful for. But I've just picked one kind of example workflow to show you how you can kind of integrate that data between ArcPro and Petrosys, or between ArcPro and other third-party software. So I'm going to be connecting to IHS Kingdom, but you can also, as Kevin said, connect to Petros or dug insight, or a whole wealth of different kind of interfaces. So I've picked an area where we've got a rich data set already used and accessible in ArcGIS Pro. And so that's our CGG geoverse interpretation product, which is built and kind of accessed through ArcGIS Pro kind of to start with. So I'm using the Voring Basin as an example, and we've mapped and interpreted 5 plays there. And I've just picked one out to use as a bit of a data set for us to explore. So the way that the product is set up is there's a group of relevant layers for each of the play elements for that play. So here you can see a reservoir lithology and GDU map. So the peach colours that you see through here are areas in which we're saying that the play was emergent at the time of deposition. And the hashes are just showing that there's no kind of material, it's either been eroded or not deposited through that area for the play. The light blue colours that you see are kind of areas of shallow marine deposition, going down into the dark blues, which were more deep marine. And then you've got the stippled kind of slightly lighter colours through there, which are kind of sand-rich submarine fans, which are kind of the key kind of component for this play and the key area of prospectivity. We've also got reservoir quality, which we can flick on, with the brighter yellows representing kind of areas where we're predicting better quality, and down to the sludgier browns are kind of worse and decreasing quality. So if I just quickly flick on source rock as well. So again, for the source rock, we have mapped deposition environment, lithology, quality, organophases, and we've done some modelling as well, but I won't show you all of those. I've just put on a layer which is kind of representing areas where there's hydrocarbon generation and expulsion. So it's a quick view look on where there's potential for hydrocarbons and where's looking good quite quickly. Again, we have a layer for seal, and we've mapped the deposition environment and lithology for that, but I'm just showing you kind of the overlay of the summary layer, essentially, of where we think the seal quality is good. So because of the kind of jump start that that's given us in terms of our knowledge for the area, I was quite quickly able to create a set of Crs maps. So I've just gone for a very simple type of Crs map here. I've done a traffic light system. You know, green is good, red's bad, orange is a bit in the middle, and I've just gone for 3 maps here, so one for each reservoir, seal and charge. Normally we'd maybe split that out and do 2 for each one, like a presence and a quality, but just to keep it simple, I've kept it at 3 for this. So here we can see our Crs map for seal. So we've got red through here where the seal has probably been eroded and maybe absent. We've got some orange areas where there's some questions over the sealing capacity for that formation, and we've got green where we believe there's probably going to be an effective seal, and we think it's all good. If I switch on for charge, again, the area that, if you remember before, we had quite a few areas around here where we were generating and expelling hydrocarbons, so we think that's all good. And then there's a bit of a kind of migration buffer where, you know, it's not expelling in the area and you'll be needing to migrate. And then we've got red where there's going to be maybe some more issues trying to migrate hydrocarbons into those areas. Again, the same with reservoir. And to keep it simple for reservoir, I've kept it on kind of initial kind of primary lithology. And we'll get on to kind of altering that a bit later as part of our workflow. But let's just imagine that we've now either received some additional data or we've maybe bought the rights to some data that we didn't have before. And we've got that data both in a Petrosys project and in an IHS Kingdom project, but we want to be able to see where that data is. So I'm just going to import the seismic lines that we've got, or the locations of them. So if I go to the Petrosys ribbon along the top and go to in this case it's a 2D survey, so go to the 2D seismic tab, and I want to import it from my Petrosys SDF file. So as you would normally, just navigate to where your SDF is, open it up, and if you have a data selection file that you have kind of already created in Petrosys, then you'll able to kind of select that as well. So if you don't want to show all the seismic and you just want a subset of the lines, it's quite easy to flick that on. So if I just click OK, that should wing its way into the project. It arrives quite quickly, and obviously, as Kevin was saying, normally you would have had to have probably exported as a shapefile and then imported. So there's a few more steps, whereas it's pretty instant to do this. And we've also got some well data available, and I just want to try and pull in where that's from. So this time, instead of importing from Petrosys, I'm just going to import this from Kingdom. Again, with the data selection file, if you've got a subset of wells that are your study wells, or you just want to highlight exploration wells or wells over a certain depth, you can pull in your data selection files to just hone it down to the wells that you want to see. The connection to Kingdom works exactly the same as it does within Petrosys itself. So if you're familiar with connecting to Kingdom for kind of displaying stuff in an interactive window, then that should look familiar to you, and there's help and support if you don't know how to do that anyway. So now we can see where we've got our data. It looks like it's going to be really useful for our CRS mapping and to help kind of constrain more in what we've mapped. We also have a depth grid for the play that we're talking about. So that depth grid is from the sea surface, as you would normally imagine. That's where it's been measured from. But I'm really most interested in the burial depth for that play. That's going to be the thing that has the most effect on our primary lithologies and the most effect on our reservoir CRS map. Handily, we can get to the surface modelling feature through the ribbon at the top. So just click on it at the top, it should load up. And I've already saved a task file from earlier in order to create an ISOPAC map. Here it is, ISOPAC. So that would just quickly create a grid that is from the seabed down to our play. So more of a burial depth than kind of necessarily including all that sea surface. So that calculated very quickly because it was quite a simple arithmetic calculation. And I can just pull that grid in and find where it was saved. So do an ISOPAC. Again, I've created that as a Petrosys grid file, but it might be that you already have that grid within Petrel, or it might be that you have some data within kind of Paleoscan and you want to pull that in to help with your depositional environment maps or whatever you're doing. So mine's a Petrosys grid file and I found it. And then you can specify what contours you'd like. So I'd like to see contours every kilometre. So that's done in metres, so I've put 1,000 in, but I'm particularly interested in around the 6 kilometre mark. So I'm going to add that in as a single level as well. It doesn't have to be a round number. I could have picked 3,092 or something like that, but I like 6,000. It sounds good to me. So I just click that to start it running. It does take kind of maybe 30 seconds or so to load, depending on the size of your grid and what the grid spacing's like. But a lot quicker than the old way of having to export as a .bil and then import and try and get the colour bar looking nice. It really is kind of a lot more responsive, which is nice to see. So now that I've imported that, I've got my CRS map in the background and I've got my grid file. I kind of want to compare the two, but they're both colour fill. But actually, it's been set up really nicely so that you can expand in the contents page, the grid, and access the different elements of it separately. So I'm actually just going to turn the colour fill off because I've looked at it and understood it and it looks good. But I can still access the contours and still display those. So it's very easy to compare with a kind of a full grid beneath it. So having done that, I've now kind of decided that actually my grid gets pretty deep in this area and I want to alter my CRS map to kind of say that I think reservoir quality is probably going to be significantly reduced in that area. So if I just select the polygon I'm looking to change, and then I can split it up. And the stuff that I've brought in from Petrosys works the same as any other kind of item in Arc Pro. So you're able to use the trace tool to kind of either clip stuff or split polygons or alter the shape of them, which makes it very easy to just make a few changes. So now that I've split that polygon up, it's very quick for me to just go in and change the kind of the style for that and apply it. So I've made it red rather than green because I'm concerned about the depth affecting the reservoir quality. So I'll just quickly save that so that it's remembered it and clear it. Now that I've done that and I've got my 3 CRS maps, what I'm going to do now, I'll just set that running, I'm now going to combine them into one. So I've made a model builder, which is essentially a way of putting processes together. So what it's doing is it's taking the 3 different maps and squishing them together into one layer, essentially. And then I can add an extra field that kind of talks about the final package, and use a bit of Python script that basically just says take the worst one of these. So if there's red in any 3 of the maps, the final map will come out red. If there's no red but there's some oranges, then it will default to orange. And if they're all 3 are green, then it will go to green. So that was quite quick to run. And if I go back to my map, just turn this off, I can pull that in from the catalogue where it's saved, my CRS combined. It will come in unstylized, so kind of with the kind of native ArcGIS symbology, but it's quite quick for me to import a symbology from elsewhere. So I'm just going to steal the symbology that I have for one of my other maps and tell it what fields to run that on. So it should nicely style up based on kind of what my other maps are. So here you can see I've combined all 3 maps together, and this part here would have been green because it's a good primary lithology for the reservoir. It's a good seal in this area and it's a good kind of set of source around. But I've been able to very quickly alter that and change that based on the depth grids that I brought in. And if this was a real life scenario, I probably wouldn't just be stopping there. I'd be making quite a lot of changes and I'd be altering a lot of things, but you don't need to all sit and watch me do all of that. It's more just to show the principle. So, and again, I haven't changed anything in the original data set this time around, but if, for example, the kind of interpretation changes and there's changes that we need to make to the mapping, as Kevin said in his introduction, it would be really easy for me to just go to synchronize all the layers, and that will just update everything from the original files. There's no needing to export and re-import, and there's no worry about version changes. You could end up with 16 different depth maps of different vintages and not well labeled if you're doing the export and import. So that really helps to kind of get around that problem. So that's kind of what I was planning to show you today. I don't know if, Kevin, I think you've got a few more slides to sum up.
Okay, so to summarise then, this is the slide or the schematic that I started with, which showed that the G&G environment is essentially separate from the GIS world. What hopefully you've seen through my slides and through Kat's demo is that we now have a tool which connects these directly using our direct connection capabilities to display and also grid data and push it straight inside of ArcGIS Pro. So the question that we asked at the start was, well, what happens now if we have more data that's acquired or reinterpreted? And as Kat picked up on there, you can just click on the synchronize button. So it makes the workflow really nice and simple now to reinterpret data and then simply synchronize it to your ArcGIS Pro maps. Similarly, you might ask, well, when new data is available, how do I update surfaces, grids, faults, for example? And as you will have seen in Kat's demo, we have the surface modelling engine built inside of the tool as well. So Kat showed an example of creating an isopack map simply by using some of our grid arithmetic. There's a whole host of other sort of geoscience toolbox capabilities within the surface modelling, from creating grids using horizon data and fault sticks, through to processing features like merging or using a cross-validation techniques to check interpretation, or the lowest closing contour tool to find prospects, through to deterministic and probabilistic volumetric tools. There's a whole host of geoscience features within there, and you can build those up as part of this workflow and just rerun those whenever you need to. And that is everything from us then. So just in closing, I guess, thanks so much to Kat again for taking us through her workflow. Hopefully you found that useful. And I'll now, I guess I'll ask my colleague Ashley, who's in the same room as me, just to let me know if there's any questions that we could take just now.
I have had a couple of questions come to me. One is, how easy is it to install and manage all the connectors?
Yes, that's a good question. There's lots of different connectors there. Like you'll have seen, we can connect to Decision Space and Petrel and Dug Insight and Paleoscan, and there's different ways that we write our connections to those. What I would say is that Petrosys write our own connections, so we're not using a third-party technology to connect to all these applications. So we do invest a significant amount of time and money to make sure that those connections are always up to date. We're always connecting to the latest versions of these applications, and more these connections are becoming easier to install. So, for example, for the Petrel connection or for many of the other ones, it's just simply a case of installing our software, and it does everything. Certainly the add-in within ArcGIS Pro, if you install our software on a machine that's already got ArcGIS Pro, that connection is already installed for you. So there's minimal some minimal work you need to do to connect to most of those connections. There are one or two, perhaps not the ones that we had on the screen, but there are sort of one or two legacy connections that require a little bit of script work, but our support teams are great at helping people set those up. So in general, the majority of the connections you need, it's just as easy as installing the software and pressing next a few times. It is quite remarkably simple in most cases.
So we've had another question from Mark. He says, does the Arc Pro add-in have any option to export from Arc Pro format into Petrosys format, i.e. the opposite direction to how Kat demoed her workflow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of exchanging things like shapefiles and layers into formats that the Petrosys Pro can read, what I would say is that Petrosys Pro as a separate software can read most formats anyway, so it can read shapefiles and file geodatabases and sort of web feature services and all these things already. So you generally don't need to convert things from an ArcGIS Pro format to be able to display them inside Petrosys Pro. I'm trying to think if there's any sort of limitations on that. I guess I would just say Petrosys Pro accepts most formats, so it should be okay. If there's a particular challenge you're thinking about, then let us know and we can look into it. But Petrosys Pro supports most things that ArcGIS Pro supports anyway. Okay.
And just one more that I had come into me. Do existing Petrosys customers have to pay extra for the module?
Right, okay, so existing Petrosys Pro customers will get this add-in as part of their maintenance agreement. So we decided that we wanted to give our clients sort of more functionality. So this comes as part of the existing maintenance agreement. So if you have Petrosys Pro and it's a maintain license, then yes, you'll get this as part of that already. So you don't have to pay us any extra. You'll be glad to hear.
And another one that's come into the chat log from Paul. Can the map in ArcGIS Pro be shared as a web map as it normally would be? Yes,
is the answer to that. That was one of the things that I checked in during the testing of this, and I think that's a really good question, because I think that ability to share ArcGIS Pro maps using the web service is a really powerful feature. I was really quite impressed by it when I was testing this, and so our maps are able to go on that. Yep.
And another one from Mark. If you save the Arc Pro project and package it with the connectors and send it to a colleague without the add-in, what happens to the link?
Right, that's a really good question. So it works slightly differently for the grids from the rest of the data. So I'll start with the rest of the data, which is, you know, the sort of wells, seismic navigation, contours, fault polygons. All of those data will open up absolutely fine if you give the map to somebody who doesn't have the Petrosys software installed. They can open that and they'll still be able to view all of that data. They won't be able to refresh it or update it from the source because it's essentially now just a static ArcGIS Pro layer, but they will be able to see it. Where it differs is in the grids. The grid uses is currently using some technology that does require our software to be installed in order to work. So the grids works a little bit differently. I think it is technically possible for us to change that, but it will require some additional development. So if that was a key requirement that you needed, then we could certainly discuss it. But at the moment, in this release, then the person you send it to would need the Petrosys technology installed to be able to view the grids. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, nothing else coming in? All right, well, I guess we'll end it there then. Just finally closing, Kat, thanks so much again. I really appreciated your time and enjoyed watching what you get up to with our technology. It's quite rewarding for us to actually see it working in real life. So thanks again.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
All right. Bye, everyone.